Chapter 8, The Alien's Lair. I don't know how long we stood there, trying to build up enough courage to go in. I do remember looking up at the sky. It was as dark as black velvet, and the stars were like diamonds scattered across it. Which one of them did you come from, Broxholm? I thought. And why did you have to come here? I heard Peter sigh beside me. Isn't it wonderful? He asked, swinging his arm up and out to indicate the entire sky. Don't you want to go there? You've been reading too much science fiction, I said. Come on, let's get this over with. Sharp leaves scraped against our faces as we pushed our way through the hole in the hedge. On the other side, we dropped to our hands and knees and crawled across the lawn. Even though we were pretty sure Broxholm wasn't home, we didn't want anyone else to see us and interrupt our mission. The lawn was drenched with dew. By the time we reached the porch, the knees of my pants were soaked through and I was freezing. How are we going to get in? Whispered Peter. Good question. It may sound stupid, but I had been so worried about what we were doing that I hadn't thought about how to do it. I don't know, I hissed back. How do people usually break into places? Peter looked at me in disgust. How would I know? I'm not a burglar. Well, neither am I snapped. I closed my eyes. Fighting wasn't going to get us anywhere. Let's circle the house, I said. Maybe we'll find an open window or something. We crept along the side of the house. As Peter played his flashlight over the windows, I felt thankful for the hedge that masked us from the street. Nothing on this side, he whispered. Check down low, I said. Maybe one of the cellar windows is open. But they were all sealed shut. Peter gestured toward the back of the house. Just around the back door, we found one of those slanting cellar doors. It was padlocked shut, but the wood was half rotted, and when Peter shook the lock, the whole thing came loose in his hand. He set it aside and carefully lifted the door. It creaked for an eternity as it came open. I found myself staring down into a well of perfect blackness. Dark, I whispered. Sure is, said Peter. Then he took a step forward. I followed him, wondering if Broxholm had booby-trapped the place. Then I wondered what kind of booby-traps an alien would use. Lasers that would cut us off at the knees, stun guns, freeze rays. Hey, these guys had come here from another star system. Who knew what they could do? We walked down 8 concrete steps. At the bottom, we came to a wooden door so old it had a latch instead of a knob. Peter lifted the latch and pushed. Nothing. He put his shoulder against the door and shoved again. It swung open with an eerie creak. After you, madam, he whispered. Well, at least shine your flashlight in there, I hissed. He pointed his beam through the door. I couldn't see anything special, just a dusty cellar, the kind you'd expect in an old house. Let's go together, I whispered. Peter took pity on me, and we stepped through the door side by side. I don't think we're going to find anything down here, he said, shining his light around the cellar. I agreed. Except for the furnace, the stairs up to the first floor, and the cobwebs, the space was completely empty. Without speaking, he headed for the stairway. I ran into a cobweb. I shivered when the wispy, clinging threads brushed over my forehead. You don't suppose Broxholm has any friends here, do you? Whispered Peter when we were about halfway up the stairs. I stopped. I don't think so, I said after a minute. He didn't mention any when he was talking to the guy in the spaceship. Peter nodded. But he had managed to make me even more nervous than I had been to begin with. What if there was another alien here? What would he do if he caught us snooping around? Where to? Asked Peter when we reached the top of the stairs. Let's try the kitchen, I said, remembering his idea about alien food. But when we opened the refrigerator, all we saw were a bunch of cold cuts, a half-empty carton of milk, a bottle of ketchup, and 2 6-packs of beer. He sure doesn't eat like an alien, said Peter. Are you sure this guy's from another planet? Let's go upstairs, I said. I'll show you the thing I saw him talking into. Peter closed the refrigerator door. But before he would leave the room, he insisted on checking the cupboards. He even opened the peanut butter jar to see if it really had peanut butter in it, and not some kind of extraterrestrial goo. The second floor had 3 bathrooms. I had high hopes for the bathroom. I thought we might find some sort of weird shampoo there or something. But it was as disappointing as the kitchen. Even the medicine cabinet was filled with typical brand name items. Do you think Mr. Smith really uses Excedrin? Asked Peter. Or is this just here to convince people he's a teacher? If he's stocking his house to fool snoopers, he'd have put in some furniture, I said. The only place where we found anything even remotely alien was the room where I had seen Broxholm talking to the man on the ship. The 2 speakers that looked like pieces of flat plastic were still hanging on the wall. I looked under the dressing table and found the switch Broxholm had used to tune in his ship. I reached out to touch it, then pulled my hand back. What if I somehow turned it on, and the man from the ship saw Peter and me standing there? Come on, said Peter, we might as well go. You don't believe me anymore, do you? I asked sadly. Peter shrugged. This place is kind of weird, what with no furniture and everything. But there's nothing that would make anyone think Mr. Smith is an alien. I believe that you believe what you told me, but whether it's true or not. He shrugged and turned to leave the room. Wait, I said, following him into the hall. We didn't try that door. Peter swung his flashlight in the direction I was pointing. It's just the attic, he said. I knew that, but I could tell by how narrow the door was. But that wasn't the point. So what if it's the attic, I said. Maybe Broxholm has something packed away up there. Come on, Peter, we've gone this far. We can't give up now. Oh, all right, said Peter. He opened the door and started up the stairway. When he got about halfway up the stairs, his head passed the level of the attic floor. I was walking so close that I bumped into him when he stopped. What is it? I whispered. When he didn't answer me, I pushed my way up beside him and cried out in horror. Chapter 9. The force field in the attic. For a long time, neither of us said a word. Is she alive? I asked at last. Peter didn't answer me. Peter, I hissed, pinching his arm. Do you think she's alive? Peter turned to me. I could see his face in the blue glow that came from the thing in the center of the attic. His eyes were glazed and blank. I wasn't sure whether he even knew I was there. Peter, I hissed. He shook his head. You weren't kidding, were you? Of course I wasn't kidding. But do you know what this means? Yeah, it means we're in big trouble. Now let's get up there and see if we can figure out what's going on. An alien, said Peter, his voice filled with awe. Mr. Smith is an alien. We're not alone. What are you talking about? I hissed. Intelligent aliens. Mankind is not alone in the universe. Well, I'm feeling pretty alone right now, I said. Are you going to help me out or not? Peter closed his eyes and rubbed his face. Suddenly his awe turned to fear. Oh my God, he said. What if Mr. Smith catches us here? I rolled my eyes. Why do you think I've been so scared all night, you yo-yo? Suddenly I realized what was going on. You never did believe me, did you? I said angrily. You thought this was all just a joke. Peter shook his head. I believed you, he said, but I didn't really understand what it meant until I believed it this way. He shrugged helplessly. I can't explain it, he said. It didn't make any difference. I understood. He was feeling the way I felt when I saw Broxholm take his face off. Come on, I said, let's get up there. Despite my brave words, I climbed the rest of those stairs pretty slowly. Peter climbed beside me. Standing side by side, we stared at the terrible thing we found. In the center of the attic was a column of blue light. It was about 3 feet across and stretched from the floor to the peak of the ceiling. And in the center of it stood Miss Schwartz. Her eyes were wide open, but they hadn't blinked once in all the time we had been looking at her. Her frizzy black hair was standing straight out from her head, as if she was getting some kind of horrible shock. Her hands were at her sides, palms forward, fingers separated. I looked carefully, but I still couldn't tell if she was breathing. "Is she alive?" I asked again. "I don't know," said Peter. "It's hard to tell." We stepped forward. Miss Schwartz didn't move. The air smelled funny. My hair started to move by itself. I could feel a strange tingling on my skin. "It's a force field," said Peter, taking another step forward. I knew he was the right person to bring with me. Only a person who read that much science fiction would know what to call something like that. Now, if he only knew what to do about it. Unfortunately, he didn't. If I could figure out where it came from, maybe I could turn it off, he told me, but I don't see any equipment. Besides, I'd be afraid of hurting Miss Schwartz. I nodded. "Do you think she's okay in there?" I asked, blinking back a tear. How had Broxholm done this to her? Maybe the handsome creep had tricked her into going out on a date with him. What a treat, a date with an alien. I could just imagine his line, "Let's go see a film, then I'll take you back to my house and lock you in a force field." What a rat. "Oh, Miss Schwartz," I moaned, "what are we going to do?" I couldn't stand seeing her trapped like that. I stepped forward and tried to reach out to touch her. "Don't!" cried Peter when he saw what I was doing, but it was too late. I had already laid my hands against the blue light. I felt a tingle run through my body. For a terrible instant, I thought I was going to be drawn into the force field too, but it didn't happen. What did happen was I heard a voice inside my head. "Susan, don't worry about me. You've got to warn the others." It was Miss Schwartz. "Peter!" I yelled. "Come here, touch the force field. You can hear Miss Schwartz." I suppose it sounded crazy, but by this time he was ready to believe anything. He pushed through the heavy air that surrounded the force field and put his hands next to mine on the column of light. "Hello, Peter," said Miss Schwartz. "Telepathy," whispered Peter in awe. "These guys are amazing." "Yes, they are," said Miss Schwartz inside our heads. "Amazing and dangerous." "What do they want?" I asked. "You," she said. I yelled and jumped back from the force field. The air around me felt so thick, it was hard to move through it. I realized I had lost my connection with Miss Schwartz. Pushing forward, I pressed my hands back on the force field. "I'm sorry," said Miss Schwartz. "I didn't mean to frighten you." I looked at her face. Her eyes were staring straight ahead. It was weird to hear her voice inside my head when she was standing there like that, looking as if she had been frozen. "Don't worry about me," she said. "Your job right now is to warn the others." "Warn them of what?" asked Peter. "About Broxholm. His mission here is to find 5 students to take back with him. He plans to select the best, the worst, and the 3 most average kids." "What's he going to do with them?" I asked. The voice inside my head sounded worried. "I didn't know for sure. The plan is to bring them back here and head out into space on the night of May 26th. "But that's next week!" I cried. Miss Schwartz moaned. "I didn't know so much time had gone by," she whispered inside of our heads. "I can't keep track inside here. Listen, you have to unmask him somehow. If you don't, you're all in terrible danger." Just then we heard the front door open and close. Talk about terrible danger. Broxholm was back.